Welcome to RJI's podcast series hosted by RJI President Lisa Ray. Restorative Justice International is an association and network of over 6,000 members and affiliates. In this podcast series, Lisa interviews leaders from around the world who support restorative justice, including crime victims, ex-offenders, exonerees, and human rights experts. In these podcasts, you will hear from key thought leaders who support systemic justice reform based on restorative justice principles. Now here's Lisa Ray.
This is Lisa Ray of Restorative Justice International. So glad to have you here today. And today's our end of the year call that we have every year where we get reports from not only RJI, myself as the president, but members of our Global Advisory Council. And today we should have 9 people joining us from around the world. And let me just add a few things about our year. As for all of us, it's been a challenging year, but we've done what we could in 2024. Some of the highlights include our involvement with the India Roundtable Conference. So we were a co-sponsor of a restorative justice conference at ICFA Law School in Hyderabad. I'm pronouncing that right. And ICFA became an affiliate of RJI's, and we did a podcast in San Diego and India with Azim Kamisa. And as you know, Dr. Upneet Lally was very involved in that conference. And secondly, we were very involved in a conference in Poland. And I was hoping that Professor Barbara was going to be with us today, but she can't. But we were a presenter at Adam Minkowitz University in Poznan, and it was sponsored by a group called Effective Justice. And Professor Barbara was very involved in that. And then a couple more, we were involved in the Family Circle Parents Forum, a conference in Israel. So we participated in that event, Working for Peace. And we interviewed a victim of violent crime in Israel named Robbie Demonley. And then lastly, we hosted something called What's at Stake podcast related to the U.S. Presidential election, but also the rise of the far right. And Eli Savitt was involved in that and the council, David Love today, and Sandro Calvani. So that's it for now. And what we'll do is we'll go around the room. And as I told you, we'll have about 7 minutes. I know that's hard to figure out when you're speaking, but thank you so much for being here today. And I think I'm going to start with Austin. I think you're up the latest.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, it's midnight here in Ireland. Look, folks, I suppose we had a very busy year. And I suppose maybe from a restorative justice point of view, the highlight was going to India. I went out to India for that conference.
Yes, I'm sorry I missed that, Austin.
It was a wonderful experience, and the enthusiasm of the students. You had to be there to experience it. They were so enthusiastic. It was unbelievable, and they really looked after me, and Upmeet looked after me out there. It was fabulous. And I suppose after that, then I retired officially from the prison service in May. So I was able to start getting involved in politics a little bit more, and I stood as a candidate in our general election, which finished there a couple of weeks ago. And obviously, I didn't get elected, but it was a parliamentary election. I was only selected on the day the election was called, so it had about 2 weeks of campaign, which wasn't really satisfactory. But what I would say is all the main political parties, bar one, had a strong restorative justice element to their manifestos, which is quite good. So my party, Fianna Fáil, which came out on top in the election, has a very strong restorative justice element in the criminal justice section of the manifesto, and there is a kind of I suppose, a need for it at the moment. The parties are being pushed into looking at other ways of dealing with crime because of the huge. I suppose we've had a population explosion in Ireland, which has led to a crime statistics going up, not enough prisons. So they're looking at other ways of dealing with the situation now, and restorative justice has actually, I suppose, the back door come into as a huge light shone upon it in the last 12 months in particular. So all the political organizations, bar one, are really focused on it as a way of dealing with crime and dealing with the outcomes of crime and preventing recidivism and that. So look, going forward, there is a fairly positive light being thrown on restorative justice in Ireland at the moment. And look, what I will be doing going forward is from a political perspective, on my own, I'll be carrying the torch myself in that respect within my own organization. Also, I have my book is getting published in March. I did the final legal stuff today with the legal read came back, and so there'll be a restorative justice element in that. So that's going to be published in March, and there will be an international, obviously, element to the UK publishing house are doing it. So there's going to be an international element to that. So that's where we're at in Ireland.
Great, Austin. And we tried to support you during that short campaign online. So we're glad to see that you ran. Yeah, and I'm sorry I missed saying that you were in India because I was well aware of that. And I know you're very well received. So thank you. And as you each speak, make sure you introduce yourself to the people that are listening. And so let's get Don John O'Malley, who I didn't know was coming. Professor O'Malley, glad to see you when you show yourself from Nigeria.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good morning.
Yes, thank you. It's good morning, exactly. It's good morning. I tried to stay awake at least to attend this because this marked the end of the year meeting for RJI, and I wouldn't want to miss this. So good morning to you all from here. And nice seeing all of you again. Thank you.
So Professor O'Malley, would you like to speak a little bit about how your year went in terms of restorative justice? And also if you have any comments about, you weren't able to hear this, but I talked about RJI's involvement in terms of speaking out for truth and justice in response to the rise of the far right. That's a big question. So I know that you might have a lot to say about that, but a few more comments.
Yeah, I know RJI has been one of our leading supporters for the African Forum for Restorative Justice. Annually, we do our Restorative Justice Week, and RJI, particularly Lisa, has been very supportive, giving free lectures to the global audience that participate. And then your lecturer have been so very, the audience that are listening to you continue to express their satisfaction. This year, unfortunately, African Forum for Restorative Justice was unable to invite you because of the US election fever. So we say we should just keep you aside. But this year we had Restorative Justice Week, and we looked at the impact of restorative justice on prison decongestion, because all over the world, the impact of overcrowding in prison has become so enormous, and the cost of feeding inmates has also become so overbearing on government. So this year, the African Forum for Restorative Justice adopted the topic on the impact or benefit of restorative justice in criminal justice, and we looked at how we could use restorative justice to decongest prisons. I think that's what I have to say for now. And like I said, I'm happy to join this meeting and to see all the experts speaking again, at least to marking the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's always great to have you. We've never met in person, but I sure appreciate you and your support and what you do. Thank you. So Paulo, why don't you go next?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Paulo Martelli from Brazil. Unmute, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So good night for me, it's night. It's about 9 o'clock here. So it's good to be with you again. I've been missing some of our meetings because, yeah, it's been a busy year. I have been teaching some courses, lectures, and workshops, as I usually do. But lately, I have been working more on internal actions in the institutions I previously trained, providing consultancy, advising, and supervising some courts, judges, prosecutors, psychologists, etc. It has been a very difficult time in Brazil from a social, political, and economic point of view. And I believe that it's exactly why we do not see restorative justice progressing here as it was in previous years. So the things are a little easy right now. It's not, we don't really know what's coming next. And so most of the things in restorative justice as well are not progressing very well at the time, but I continue to do my work. So I hope you guys in the other parts of the world are doing better restorative justice, progressing a bit more than they are in Brazil.
Well, it's important that you're there and that you continue to stay close in touch with us too, so we can support you. So thank you, Paulo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to David Love in Philadelphia. Welcome, David.
Yes. Hello, Lisa. It is a pleasure to be here, and it is a pleasure to be with so many wonderful people who are doing such great work around the world. So I am David Love, and I'm a journalism and media studies professor at Rutgers in New Brunswick, New Jersey, but I am living in Philadelphia. And so this past year, I've been thinking a whole lot about restorative justice. I mean, aside from the fact that I always do, I think particularly this past year when we consider all that has been happening locally in the United States in terms of the changing of administrations about to take place and the election that just ended, their concerns about the erosion of democracy and the onset of authoritarianism in this country, looking around the world and looking at what's happening in the Mideast and what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon and Syria. I think that as someone who works with college students and with graduate students, particularly in the area of journalism and media studies, restorative justice is needed in journalism more now than ever. And I try to encourage, instill these values in my students as much as I can. So I teach a course in media ethics and law. I also teach a course on gender, race, and class in the media, which looks at how the media portrays marginalized groups from the standpoint of the dominant culture. And I also teach a social justice journalism lab where I have students producing media and doing reporting that centers local communities, marginalized groups, low-income people, and the issues that they care about. And I really believe media can be a force for positive change. And those are values that I really emphasize with students. But I also know how media have been used and are being employed now to cause harm, trauma, incite violence around the world. When you look at Nazi Germany, when you look at the Rwandan genocide, the media were front and center in causing harm to people. And here in the United States, newspapers were complicit with slavery and Jim Crow and the internment of Japanese Americans and so many other horrible events. And even today, we see how media is a testing ground for putting ideas, bad ideas into policies, scapegoating migrant communities and the normalization of violence against marginalized people. So all these things are important to me, and I think that media misinformation, disinformation is something I've been focusing on quite a bit this past year, and teaching about it, writing about it, and sort of connecting the dots between our broken media system in the US and around the world and how it helps to erode democracy. I think media practitioners can help to bring on authoritarianism, but at the same time, they can play a role in helping to heal societies. And that is a concept that I've been encouraging, that I think that really journalists should look at transformative justice and restorative justice. I think that too often my profession, journalism, has relied on old ways of thinking, old practices, and unfortunately, journalists, reporters have helped to perpetuate these power structures and inequities in society. So I try to encourage empathy in reporting, understanding other groups' points of views, listening to people, being aware of perspective and history, listening and centering members of marginalized communities, understanding trauma and the role that that plays in people's experiences, and also to center communities, experts, sources who come from marginalized communities. And also, I think it's important to support media professionals from those groups. And I'll just end by saying that that my study of the harm that media does, as well as the potential healing that it can accomplish, is a lifelong work for me and a work in progress. And it's great to talk with all of you today.
Thank you so much, David. And I appreciate the recording that you made when we did our 5 minutes with David Love, which was the podcast on what's at stake right before the election. So that's actually on our website. People can still see that on under podcast. Thank you. Let's go to Jane Bolito. Jane, good to see you.
Good to see you too. But I wonder if we should go to Helen and Martin, and then I'll pick up on the gaps between New Zealand and Australia.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, let's do that. Go ahead, Helen. Why don't you start?
Oh, kia ora. I thought I would just do a greeting in Māori because that feels right for me. So, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko whanganui atara taku whānau, ko tangata tiriti ahau, ko tamaki makaurau me kati kati inaianei. Ko muriwai te moana, ko okari toto te awa, ko waitakari te monga, ko Hawani Waititi te marae, ko Helen Bowen taku ingoa. So greetings from New Zealand. I'm a lawyer and a restorative justice practitioner. It's really great to be part of this team. And I just first of all want to say thanks to Lisa for holding the fort under extremely difficult circumstances. And I'm sure we all are just doing whatever we can to support you in a very difficult situation. And those of you who are in the States, my heart goes out to you. So I just wanted to say that it's a difficult time for everybody. And the work that you're all doing, I'm full of admiration for. So, and I really feel that, Lisa, you've stepped up in so many ways and in a really difficult environment. So I'm really wanting to say that we all appreciate the work that you do. And I think that, and you keep doing. And David's discussion today is just so relevant to what we're all experiencing, probably around the world, but particularly where you are. So thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you. So my year has been, my view when things are going right wing, conservative right, not the other right, is that I just buckle down and work a lot harder, and I work in the area that I can. So I just graft away and do what I can and say as many politically strong things that I can at the right time. So in New Zealand, we've got a very conservative government right now. So we just, those of us that are on the left just work really hard to be pro-Māori, to get our voice out there as often as we can. But work-wise, restorative justice is doing okay here in spite of a conservative government. I'm sure Jane will confirm that. But my role is I'm trustee on a number of boards, but I also still facilitate conferences. So I've been asked to facilitate conferences in the drug court between offenders and their case managers. I've been asked to facilitate conferences at school when there's been harm and violence perpetuated over some years ago. So I get quite a variety of work here, and it is continuing. And if anything, there's more of it. So we're involved in youth court, which is a restorative process largely, although that's up for debate. In drug court, we have a restorative component in it at the end of their time in court. So they spend 18 months. I'm a drug court lawyer, and towards the end of that time, they have to meet with their victims. And that's an incredibly helpful time for a victim to see that an offender's gone right through a rehab process, largely because of the offending against that victim. So those conferences are more powerful, more rich, more multi-layered, and very effective at that time. The other thing we started about 2 or 3 years ago that's only really just started properly is a Māori post-sentence restorative justice process. So it's for sentenced offenders who are either on a sentence where they have probation or they've been released from prison and are on probation. So we've started doing those conferences, and I believe this is kind of an untouched area in many ways, particularly in New Zealand. I know they've had those conferences in Europe, victim offender mediation, but largely I see offenders getting just left and their families getting left at this time. So what we do is we have a meeting where victim and offender and family come together, and then we develop a pathway, a framework for them going forward. So I'm seeing that as really a useful intervention right now. So that's kind of where I want to put my energy for the next little while. I've spoken to Australian lawyers. I've been to a trauma conference. I spoke to law students about trauma because they have to learn about what that's going to be like in practice in their own lives and in dealing with crime. I went to Somaliland last year with a colleague, and we're trying to get a voice for the women in prison in Hargeisa. So if there's the opportunity to do restorative justice within that environment, that's something else we will try. But it's very poor. It's Muslim. It's very hard to find the right people to work with, but we've started a conversation. So that's quite exciting work. We've been asked to do some work in Samoa and just do some training with they have a customary traditional process in Samoa. So a whole lot of us, all Samoan except me, will go there and we'll just do a 5-day training in 2026. So I just really want to say thank you to Lisa and all of you, because it's for me, it's really great to be part of a wider group. And if we can hold some sort of meeting in the future in person, I'll be there. So I don't know if there's anything coming up next year, but I will be in Europe in August. But I'm always keen to travel, certainly to Ireland. I love Ireland and the States. So if there's an opportunity for us all to meet at some time, I'd be very keen for that. So just wanted to say a big thank you.
Right, Helen. And can you actually comment on one other thing?
Sure.
Around the world, I think we were all watching the big march in New Zealand. Can you talk about that briefly, about the Maori March?
Yeah, so our right-wing government is trying to dissipate or reduce the rights of Maori within New Zealand. And there was a treaty that was signed, and a politician has basically said, why don't we redesign it and redesign it from a Western viewpoint? And it won't go anywhere because the current government have said they won't support it. But the rhetoric around it has been very damaging and toxic. So the good thing is that all of Māori came out, and so it's actually, in fact, reinforced all of the good work that's been done before. And there is something of a renaissance within Māori. So it's not so much of a problem. It's just really the optics of it, I guess, that are questionable. But for my part, all the work that I do with Māori is appreciated, and we have a lot of Pākehā that's white people in New Zealand. That's what we call, who work alongside Māori. So there's some really good relationships being rebuilt or built as a result of that conflict.
Good, thank you. Yeah, it was incredible to see the number of people that marched. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much, Helen.
No,
so let's go to Jonathan Peter Clayton, and Jane will come to you afterwards. Jonathan, are you there from South Africa?
Yes.
There he is. Good to see you.
Yes, I am. Good day to you all. Good to see you all also. I can't say good morning or good evening, rather saying good day to you all. And it is really exciting to be on this platform, to be connected to the world. And that is extremely exciting. If I can start by just saying that we had a very good election outcome. That we had for many years the apartheid government, where people were discriminated against the color of their skin. And then in 1994, we had the ANC that took charge of the country for the last 30 years. But there was so many challenges about that. And we actually saw the challenges of one government party ruling, and now we have a government of national unity where more political parties are in control. So many political parties are now also assigned as ministers of different portfolios. And so there was a time that we also have one minister for the Department of Justice and Correctional Services. But now there is just a minister for correctional services, which is very helpful because it was evident that one person to be in charge politically of two big departments didn't work out. And there was a lot of backlog, which this minister really now pulled everything together. And we see a lot of changes. So that was a very good move. But coming back, as you know, that my speciality over the last 33 years is restorative justice and victim offender dialogue processes in custodial settings. So you will find me behind bars every single day. That's where I find myself. That's where I want to be. That's where I just live out this process of restorative justice. I can also just announce that over the last 14 years, we had Dr. Ulrika Fritzen from Sweden, who came to observe our restorative justice process with many Swedish people that came over. She obtained her PhD in this process, and she focused on guilt because she was saying that unfortunately there were in the past offenders in Sweden that was very suicidal because they couldn't deal with guilt. And she came to observe that. And now we have a team in Sweden that's working in two correctional facilities on this restorative justice process. And they just appointed a person to expand the restorative justice process in custodial settings in Sweden as well. So that was a great highlight. Myself and my wife spent time in Sweden 2 months ago, and we were really well received, and it was really exciting to meet the team because they were all in South Africa over the years. Referring now back to correctional services in South Africa, I am pleased to say that for this year, 2024, we had an extremely successful year. We engaged with 14 restorative justice processes. Now, in each process, we have an average of 28 offenders for 100 hours. Just one group of offenders for 100 hours. And we had 14 groups of that throughout the year in 12 correctional facilities in the country. So that was extremely productive and effective. The outcome was that more than 70% of these offenders, many of them even pleaded not guilty in court, and they still claimed to be not guilty. They were claiming that they were framed or they blamed the justice system. But during the 100 hours, even the first 36 hours, many of them confessed that they are guilty. They are now taking responsibility. They even confess crime that they were not accounted for, and that was also very good. There was a really extreme remorse because the truth, responsibility, accountability, and genuine remorse is very important for victims of crime. And we experienced that, the remorse in action, that many of them even denounced the gangs within the communities and even within the correctional facilities. And when you denounce the gang in the prison, your life is at stake. But fortunately, again, nobody got hurt when they stepped out of the gangs as well. So that was also the sign of their genuine remorse. We invited their families on this process, and it was amazing that the families, although it was very painful, but as families were saying, very helpful, that they now know that their loved ones are serving a sentence because they are guilty, because they lied to their families, they lied in court, they lied to the victims, and then they start telling the families the truth and apologize for lying to them. And they also confess their crime and their criminal behavior, and that was extremely helpful for everybody, and that would help us to prepare victim offender dialogue processes. So that was really good. We had extremely painful victim offender dialogue processes. I was also asked to observe a hearing, a parole hearing, and I did get some input there in terms of the reason why the offender was not ready to be eligible for parole, and that was highly accepted. And so we are really accepted within the Department of Correctional Services as a service provider run the restorative justice and victim offender dialogue processes in the custodial settings. So as I said, that this is always a very, very painful experience, especially when they now start speaking the truth and taking responsibility, and we sense through that the genuine remorse. And then also I trained 450 correctional officials for 18 hours per group in different correctional facilities in the country. And so this 450 correctional officials were social workers, psychologists, chaplains, heads of centers, the case management committee, even the parole boards. They come in groups of 45, and I spent 3 days, 18 hours with them, and the outcome was also extremely good. One chaplain said to me, tell the minister, tell the national commissioner, we don't do things the way it should be in terms of restorative justice and victim offender dialogue processes. We need more training. And so a week ago, I received a phone call from the National Office of Correctional Services, which was a huge highlight for us for 2024. The legal department of correctional services at the national offices approved a certificate that our memorandum of understanding for 2025 and beyond will be approved by the national commissioner, where we will be entitled to be in all 243 correctional centers in South Africa as from 2025. So that was a huge, huge breakthrough and excitement. And through that, we sense that they appreciated our restorative justice process over the last 27 years that we are on this journey. Our restorative justice team is about an average of 40 team members. Around about 20 of them is working with my wife on the female side, and around about 20 is working with myself on the female side. And it's all extremely excited people that's on board. So
thank
the
you,
restorative
Jonathan.
justice.
Can you bring this to a close? But thank you so much. Are you
I
a little
will.
bit?
Can I just mention that the other process is that our restorative justice handbook in custodial settings for South Africa is now completed. We wrote it over 27 years, it's edited. It's now going for graphic designing, and we will launch it in 2025. So we had an extremely great year.
Excellent. Excellent. Sounds like you did. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're still with us too, with RJI and this council. Thank you. So we have 2 more reports, and then after that, if we have time, I think we will. I do want to talk about the rise of the far right, democracy, and restorative justice, which is a big, big subject. But Jane, do you want to go ahead at this point?
Martin, do you want to go for Australia?
No, let's go with you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name's Jane Bolitho, and I'm incredibly lucky to be I'm an academic, and I'm located in work in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, which is the Maori name for the place we now call New Zealand. And I'm incredibly lucky because I'm in a dedicated restorative justice professorialship. So I get to really progress the restorative justice movement in the Southern Hemisphere. And I exist in a small team at a university and the centre's called Te Ngāpara, and it's the Centre for Restorative Justice. And our job is to extend the reach and improve the quality of restorative practices. And while I work in New Zealand, I have the contemporary arrangement of living where I was born in Australia. So if you imagine the map of Australia, I'm in New South Wales on the central coast. I'm on Darkinjung country today. very loud cicadas out the back, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. So the work in New Zealand, there's lots that you can find on our website. We do a lot of evaluative work for government departments because in New Zealand and Australia, a lot of restorative is legislated. With the change in government that Helen has spoken of in New Zealand, it has had an incredible impact, and it is a very difficult time. And I just wanted to kind of just touch on that briefly to say that the Maori people in our New Zealand team have had a very difficult year, and as we walk alongside them in allyship, it's a struggle because it's identity politics, and there are little things that are massive. So as one example, most of the New Zealand government departments have Maori names alongside the English version, and those names are now being taken away as per street signs that were in both languages. And what that feels like for our Maori colleagues is, obviously it's a complete devastation. So that's the backdrop for what's going on in New Zealand. And of course, that's a very difficult climate for restorative. We now have boot camps, for example, coming back into fashion. So while restorative is legislated, the next couple of years are going to be very difficult. In New Zealand, a couple of our bigger projects were around training, accreditation, pathways for restorative practitioners, especially in domestic and family and sexual violence. That work was very exciting, and so I'm glad to have been working on that. As we look to next year, we are trying to strategize around how to survive during this time. Our sponsorship has gone from 7 departments to 2, so we'll be very lucky as a centre to survive the next couple of years. A lot of the rhetoric is around timely justice, so we're thinking about how to pivot our language to kind of survive this time. In Australia, things are different. We don't have that government. I wanted to mention a major initiative, which is the Australian Law Reform Commission report into sexual harm and options. And I've been able to contribute quite a lot on the restorative justice front. That's going to be released in January, and I'm very excited for that. I wanted to kind of note a couple of positive, more hopeful signs, which are that there are some new trans-Tasman networks that bring practitioners and academics from Australia and New Zealand together to advance restorative practice causes. There's one that's dedicated to health and disability system reform. There's an Oceania Sexual Harm RJI practitioner network. There's a government network sitting across both countries, and there's also a the professional indemnity body that sits across both countries that has a new RJ committee. So I personally think, just like being glad to be on this advisory council, that those collaborative spaces where we can collectivise are just absolutely everything in these times of crisis. And I'll just finish by saying that I went to 3 amazing conferences this year, one in Hawaii, quite a large New Zealand and Australian contingent. What I noticed was the interest in transformative justice. And that was quite energising. There was also a large dedicated conference in Canberra, which brought all the peoples together, especially across education and justice. And then just recently, last week, I was in Christchurch in New Zealand at the criminology conference, and there was a wonderful keynote by a Scottish professor, Fergus McNeill, and he talked about regenerative justice. And so I wanted to finish by saying, even though I'm a, associate professor of restorative justice, in this difficult time, the languaging we need to kind of connect more broadly. If someone calls it regenerative justice, someone calls it transformative justice, we're in the same kind of field, and we need to really collectivise around that.
Amen. Very good, Jane. Yeah, I agree with that. Very good. Yeah. And that's why we're here, isn't it? We're sharing, and no matter what our challenges, it's so important to connect the dots. So Martin, why don't you go? My longtime colleague, Martin Howard. You're muted. Whoop. There you go.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying these reports, especially coming from a place where I think restorative ideology is on the back foot in the public domain anyway in Queensland. So my name's Martin Howard. I have been with RJI for a while, but I'm also with Prison Fellowship in Australia, with Restorative Practices International, which ran the conference that Jane just mentioned. And then there's the Sycamore Tree Project, which I brought to Queensland, which isn't doing so much in Queensland at the moment, but is quite strong in 40 other countries and Western Australia, different parts of Australia, and we're developing that. I do a lot of work in web design with various restorative organizations, going back to Dan Van Ness 30 years ago. And then my actual day job is working with the Australian Dental Association as a visual communicator and branding consultant. So there's a few hats there, but I think a lot about the way that we communicate restorative justice. That's been a big thing that's occupying my thoughts this year, and it comes down to conversations that I'm having with people on both sides of the political fence, and people who have strong feelings, especially in Queensland, about the state of where we're at in which is we're locking up 10-year-olds. We're legislating to ensure that we can lock up children who still have their baby teeth, and even our Labor Party, both sides of politics have betrayed our youth in that area and have made it more difficult for a youth offender to make a good life, to come back from the terrible trauma that characterizes their life for, the first 10, 12 years of their life. We know that they have serious mental health issues, and they're not going to be addressed. They're going to be exacerbated by incarceration. That said, we do have a restorative conferencing initiative for youth. It doesn't have a very good reputation. It is a very good one, but in the public, it is seen as a soft option, and certain people have taken the opportunity this last 12 months to bag it, but it is a strong, functioning, great initiative. But the reality is that both sides of Parliament have stepped back from restorative practices and have succumbed to the rhetoric around tough crime legislation. So that's somewhat disheartening. So it's really important for me and people in Queensland to be around other restorative practitioners and to be also connecting with people in Europe and New Zealand and other parts of the world where restorative thinking, ideology, and activity is moving forward. And I can allude to great examples in places like Scotland or the Netherlands or Northern Europe, where restorative thinking is a part of their criminal justice policy. So the communal aspect is very important. And I'm finding that in my conversations and writing about restorative justice, that we are having to change the way that we communicate about this, because I think ideologically the world has taken a big step back in our understanding of the intersection of compassion and humanity in as a response to crime. So the language of the right has become they've co-opted and bent a lot of the language that we deal in, and even things like evidence-based and compassion are being turned around to be pejorative terms. So when I read some of the writing of restorative practitioners, I'm filtering them through the new mindset that is now in the mainstream, in Australia and in America, and I'm seeing that it's not communicating anymore to a large part. There are some people that we're never going to be able to get through to on the far right, but there's people in the center that now are picking up some of these attitudes and ideologies around anti-compassion and tough crime policy, which means a lot of our communication is redundant or even harmful. So I'm really thinking and activating and rethinking and working on how we do that and how I communicate to other restorative justice practitioners and writers about this ideological gap that's open up. And on the good news side, a lot of this year I've been working on a thing called the Forgiveness Project, which is not the one from our colleague in England or in Europe anyway. It's a smaller version of the Sycamore Tree Project that we can run in prisons in a day. And the idea came from a convergence of prison fellowship with the Abdullah family. And in Australia, in Australia, they're well known as a family who lost 3 of their children in a disastrous, tragic incident with a drunk driver who ran over them on the footpath. A beautiful family. They also lost a cousin in that same incident. So it was extraordinarily disastrous at a time where everyone can relate to that experience of letting the kids go down to the shops to get an ice cream. They're on the way back, but they don't come back. And she made the remarkable move. This is about 3 or 4 years ago, the remarkable step to forgive the perpetrator, the person who was driving the car, who was on drugs and alcohol affected, because it was a product of her faith and the way that she understands the world, but also she's aware of the weight and the toxicity of anger that will overtake a person who's experiencing that magnitude of trauma and grief. And as a couple, and she has a few other children, as a family, they have come through that experience remarkably. They have a foundation where it's called it's about forgiveness anyway. It's a forgiveness foundation. She talks to various groups and people and victims of crime about what forgiveness really is. And it's a restorative understanding of forgiveness, which is letting go of that toxic anger and addressing your needs and not holding something against a person. Against the perpetrator, but at the same time recognizing that there is justice due to that person, and you may not necessarily trust that person. There is a relational breakdown that exists and complications around that relationship that'll always be there. However, she talks very significantly about that. And she has an interest in bringing that story to prisons to talk to people who have committed crimes about forgiveness. And that is the reality that most inmates have a very significant trauma in their background, or multiple traumas and current traumas of imprisonment. And forgiveness is part of the way to work through that. And that's what we've found in the Sycamore Tree Project, running it for so many years now, that there are 2 key things that are a massive breakthrough for for a perpetrator of crime and a person who's really a captive to an extent of their criminal past. One is that they do have people that they need to forgive, and that is done in a very gentle and encouraging way. But once they understand that sometimes a crime is being committed to them, even though didn't go to court, or something very traumatic has happened to them, that forgiveness is part of the way through that, and it's a voluntary, and it is a process, but it's something that they can do. And they're often very short of options of what they can do. So that is a key breakthrough that we find every time. And another thing is just to learn to talk about their experience, a difficult experience they've had. Sometimes it's the crime they committed, or it's something that's been harm that's been committed against them. But just learning to articulate something and remove some of that shame and observe other people doing that is such a critical step in the beginning of their rehabilitation.
Okay, Martin, can you draw it to a close, and then we'll open it up for more conversation.
Sure. Thank you very much for your patience. But yeah, I would say that has brought some great encouragement to me to work through that and to work with people who are really at the cutting edge of what I'd call radical forgiveness, a movement that we know that is a big part of a catalyst for restorative justice. It's great to work with those people and to be able to tell their story to other people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. And let me just add to your comments. Martin and I, for those, some of you know this and the listeners might not, Martin and I have in common sycamore tree, because I ran the first sycamore tree in the state of Texas in 1998. So the first in-prison restorative justice project. But that's how we met each other. And so thinking back 1998, what was critical about that first pilot is we brought crime victims into the prison. And so what Martin was describing happened in 1998, and it has happened in many other sycamore trees around the world. And so we can't lose sight of that and realize that RJI and the first organization that I founded called the Justice and Reconciliation Project, it was about working with crime victims who told their stories about why they support restorative justice. So that's not new, but now that we're, as Martin described it, a little differently than maybe I would, but now that we're in kind of a new reality around the world in terms of responding to crime, what's considered politically correct seems like it's shifting. I'm not sure it's fully shifting, but it is in certain places. We know that, certain countries, but I still think we have the upper hand in terms of talking about the right response to crime that brings healing to victims of crime, accountability to offenders, and peace to communities. So I really think that's the conversation we need to have around the world. So we can talk about this, but I'll open it up and you all can share. But I also want to get back to the huge subject I mentioned earlier about the rise of the far right around the world. And what I want to kind of tease out, and I think of Austin often when I say this, is the importance of truth telling, and how important that is to democracies, and how important it is to any government, and it's important in our justice systems. So any comments to that? I know it's a big one. And wave your hand.
I just want to say, in our country, in the past, in the apartheid years, and also with the 30 years of the ANC in charge, it's all about power. And when people become power crazy, there's a lot of lies, there's a lot of corruption, and there's a lot of maladministration. And so I agree that truth telling is the way forward, and restorative justice principles and processes is extremely important, even amongst our politicians.
Absolutely. Other comments? Don
I'll
John?
say,
Well, let's get Don John first. Unmute yourself. You're on mute. Don John, there we go.
Good. And like we say, the emergence of far right within the political space globally has become a matter of concern. Because it is a matter of concern because if democracy is supposed to be government of the people and for the benefits of the people, then the emergence of far right within democracy is an aberration. How will a political leader who wants to be a leader of the people begin to propagate an extremist kind of ideology or thinking or campaign or something? Then it's something that makes some of us to begin to think that is democracy really for the people or for the few who just want to get themselves there and then rule rather than lead. And this thing, the danger of this is how are the youths, our upcoming younger ones, seeing leadership? Because the current development across the globe is making people to think that, yes, power is might. But all I know is that it creates opportunity and additional challenge for us who are in restorative justice, who are advocating for restorative justice, to continue to do our job. Because the more difficult the situation, the more we should still buckle up to try to counter this far-right ideology within our political space. Thank you.
Others, Paulo?
What I'm seeing is we, as a restorative justice, not only practitioners, but thinkers, so to say, we're missing the point here. We're trying to understand why people think this or that way. It's not our job to understand why they think that way. It's our job to ask them what they're thinking, why they're thinking that way, and what can bring us together. Because fundamentally, we all want the same. We just want the same using different ways, you know? I think we could use some of our practices, you can call it circles, conferencing, whatever, to bring people together, to really try to help them understand each other way of thinking. And that's the main thing that I think that restorative justice is missing right now, all over the world, you know? All I can see is we're putting ourselves inside the struggle, you know? On this side, on the other side, whatever. It's not our job to take sides. It's our job to help people understand each other, understand themselves firstly, and then understand each other. Because what I think as a psychologist, as a restorative practitioner, well, the most that I've seen in more than 1,000 circles in serious crimes and whatever, people usually doesn't understand what's happening to them, emotionally speaking. And so firstly, we need to help them to really understand themselves, what they did, what they think, what they think, what they are feeling what they are feeling. When we can do when we succeed in doing that, it's easy for helping them to understand each other. That's why we're doing when we run conferencing on circles from victim offender situations. That's our job. Ask them questions to help them understand themselves and understand each other. So why don't we're doing that when we talk about politics? Why not open space, create open spaces to let people talk to each other? Because what I can see here in Brazil, and of course we see it happening in the US, is we are creating more and more divisions, not us in restorative justice practitioners, but we, the people, we are apart from each other more and more and more. It's not a good thing, we need to try to understand why people choose this or that way. I guess that's one thing that I would really like to do, to take part of, to take a part in this process, to bring people together, to really try to understand why they are doing some kind of things or thinking in that way, whatever. I think that's my job. I think ask questions for people to really understand themselves and each other.
Thank you, Paulo. Well, we're very diverse here. That's why we have a psychologist also here, like Paulo. But let me just say this, that if I didn't say this earlier, we did put out a statement. RJI put out a statement in October, and it was about the rise of the far right and about the US presidential election. So it was about all of it. But we based it on the work we do as we advocate for restorative justice. But we also looked at the rise of the far right around the world, and there were approximately 23 countries that are on the far right. And also Dr. Sandro Calvani did an excellent short podcast for us about that subject. And so, while I agree with you, Paulo, about trying to understand people, where they're coming from and why they think the way they do, I think RJI is unique in that we take public policy positions based on our passionate support for restorative justice, and that is the way forward in terms of our response to crime, no matter what happens to countries and which way they fall at present. So let me open it up again. Austin, I think you had comments, and then Martin. And Austin, you're muted.
No, I'm unmuted. Yeah, just in relation to this particular topic, just a couple of things. The EU have moved now. We used to have what the EU Commission had, the Radicalization Awareness Network, and there was about 7 or 8 subgroups, and I was on the working group for victims of terrorism. That project is now finished. Okay, and what they now have is an EU knowledge hub on the prevention of radicalization, and they have created 7 subgroups in relation to that. Okay, so the subgroups are ideologies and conspiracy narratives is the first one, and I've looked to be a co-chair of that group. And then there's prisons and rehabilitation and integration. The next one is new technologies and online dimension. Then there's local dimensions, polarization and resilience. The next one is lone actors and mental health issues. The next one is management of foreign terrorists, fighters, volunteers, and their families. So that's people who volunteer to go out and fight, and then are looking to come home. And then there's the global geopolitical factors. So those are the knowledge hubs that the EU are working on in relation to radicalization. So that's going to be kicking off in 2025, and I have looked to chair that first group, the ideologies and conspiracy narratives one. In relation to the rise of the far right, Ireland hasn't seen that much of it. There's a strong online dimension. And what we have found here in Ireland is that the NGOs and the politicians have been quite good at countering that online and presenting the opposite narrative. And I have to say, when I was out canvassing during the election, I only came across it on one door, and I was actually surprised at the door that I came upon it on. It was a very educated, well-to-do, middle-class woman, and she was just spouting about the stuff that she was reading, the conspiracy theories online. But that was the only person that kind of came with that, and they didn't do very well in our election. 5% of the vote or so. So it does. I know the probably conditions in Ireland, the economy is doing very well and stuff like that. So when the economy is doing well, that sort of stuff doesn't tend to get a foothold, whereas the economy was doing bad. Get the natural place for a lot of people to start blaming immigrants and start, blaming the asylum seekers and stuff like that. Look, I just really think that the countering, particularly the online stuff, has really worked here. Particularly some of the work that I all the political parties have been fairly good at it, to be honest with you, right across the board. We have no kind of real far right. We have one or two, but they're very, very small. All the major political organizations are kind of center right or center left, and then there's some extreme left wing ones. But the countering that is important, and I mean I think we have managed to do that, and it just goes to prove that as much there was an awful lot of money put into money that came from far right groups in the United States was pumped into some campaigns. There was a person ran against me in the election, and the amount of money that was spent, and we have a cap in a 3-seat constituency that I was in. You were allowed to spend 38,000 euros on your campaign, and she must have gone to the max on that because there was money coming in from. She was attached to Robert Kennedy's group, and there was an awful lot of funding came from her via that group. So that's the sort of stuff. But she was very good online. She was very good at putting her posters up. But once the counter arguments were made, she'd nowhere to go.
Very
So that's
interesting.
the sort of stuff that Europe is doing and that Ireland is doing at the moment.
Thank you, Austin. And Martin, why don't you make your comments? And I was thinking also how this kind of touches back to what David Love was talking about in terms of social media and the media in general. So maybe you have some comments after Martin. Martin?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very interested to hear David's comment. But the issue in Australia, I think, is more polarization than the movement of the far right. I think the far right is being energized by the kind of arguments that are happening. But what's happening in Australia is a lot of memes and language has entered the local political discourse, and pushed polarization. So 5 years ago, we would have quite a sophisticated discourse on public television every Tuesday night, where people of very different flavors would come together and have a civil discussion and bring out the issues. But now that's impossible. That particular program doesn't have any of the kind of interest that it had, and the people who come on it tend to be drifting towards that polarized kind of language. So that's where we're at the moment, and I think that's a problem that both the left and the right need to take responsibility for. I think the polarization has become a feature of both sides, and so if we find ourselves on the left, we need to speak to that, and we need to de-escalate some of the rhetoric on the left side and vice versa. But also, especially, I want to talk about Jonathan's focus on truth, which I think is critical. But the repurposing of language is a very problematic feature of this issue of truth, because both sides are using very similar language to describe something very different. And words like law and order, or tough on crime, or whatever, that historically have been abused. We've just seen more of that, more bending of language. And I think so we need to fight that with better language. We need to communicate better, and we need to be more mindful of the way that language is being abused and educate ourselves and others about that.
Interesting comments. David?
Yes, I've been enjoying all of the comments, and I feel like I'm learning so much from everybody. Um, I think that there is looking at the rise of the far right, particularly in the U.S. context, social media definitely plays a large role, and the fact that hate groups are able to create their own ecosystem online, cultivate their relationships with the public, with far right groups, militias, members of government, um, and it's working and it is successful. I think add to that rising inequality that has taken place for the past 40 years and misinformation. And no, something has definitely been brewing, and people are unhappy. The inequality, the US has serious problems when it comes to poverty and the gap between the haves and the have-nots. COVID certainly did not help things. And I believe that when you have so many people who are living in misery as a result of policies that conservatives and liberals have cultivated for years, you can either punch up and blame the handful of people who control most of the economy, billionaires, or you can punch down at migrants and Muslims and other marginalized groups. And unfortunately, Republicans in this country have been successful in getting people to punch down. Um, but then there's also a caveat. So recently, some of you may have heard about the murder of the health insurance executive, the health insurance CEO, and which obviously is a very tragic incident. It has also been an opportunity where people are starting to talk about the problems, the endemic problems of the US, the rising inequality, the fact that the US is the only country in among the advanced economic powers that doesn't have universal health care. And I don't know where any of this is going, but I think it just shows how this the inequality in this country, I think, helps to lead to fascism. I think we have to find some way to reach people and to help heal them.
Any other comments? We're drawing to the end of our time together. Other comments?
I just want to say I think I've really appreciated everybody's comments, and we all come from diverse places. So I think it's really interesting just to have that opportunity to hear one another. For me, I think we need to change the languaging from restorative to transformative, because what's happening, we don't really want, people don't need to be restored. We want a new approach. And I think that the polarization in the languaging and the media and all the things that have been allowed to happen in something of a vacuum, whereas if we can gather people and sort of reintroduce a way of communicating together rather than apart. I noticed in Ireland there was an opportunity for the critical voice to be heard when I've travelled there, and I've noticed that, and I don't see it so much in New Zealand, perhaps not so much in Australia. So it's kind of finding ways in which we can hear one another and and letting people know the success stories, no matter what side of the divide they're on. So, and truth telling in a conference is transformational. So if we hear somebody that we wouldn't normally talk to and we hear their point of view, it may have the capacity to change some of our thinking. So I think perhaps it's up to us to start to find some places where our voice can be heard and where we listen to those other views and see if there's some common ground somehow.
Well, let me just respond to that, Helen, just by saying that, like I said earlier, RJI has always been about telling the stories of victims, victims of violent crime. And many of those are on our council. They're not all here today. Austin's one, but we have others, Alba Griffith from Ireland and Joe Barry from England. But it's always been critical to get those stories out because they really do change minds. And the organization that was mentioned, the Forgiveness Project in London, they tell stories all the time, but it's important because that drives people's opinions, and opinions drive policies. I mean, I come from a political background. I ran for Congress in 2006. I worked in the state legislature in California. So I've lived through watching how crime is used as a political football. So in 1994, I was in the California legislature, and that was the year that everyone had a 3 strikes, you're out bill. And I worked for Justice Fellowship, a sister group of Prison Fellowship Ministries. And we took an adamant position opposed to 3 strikes, every bill that was authored. And as you know, that bill, there was a ballot initiative, but there were also bills, they all passed. But we took that position. And I remember I worked for Chuck Colson. If you remember, Chuck Colson was the founder of Prison Fellowship, who did time because of Watergate. And I had to get approval to take that position, to oppose 3 strikes. And it came back to me, I was told, go at it, take that position. So see, we need to go back to that conversation because now 3 strikes is being introduced in other states, other countries, Australia, as if it's popular and as if it's right. And we have another story to tell. And politics is cyclical. There's nothing new under the sun. That's a biblical passage. But I really think we have to talk about restorative justice and remind people what it is, whether we talk about it as transformative. There's always been conversations about how to talk about restorative justice and whether to change its name. I think I and Don John O'Malley here have some very strong opinions about using the phrase restorative justice and keeping it that way and not altering it because it's a thing of beauty. But I think we have to continue to do what we do best. But telling the stories is very important and getting those voices out. And that's how you affect public opinion. And, we have a lot of work to do in terms of the rise of views that are reflective of authoritarianism and the far right. But I don't think we're behind the 8 ball today. It looks like a dark time. It is a dark time in many places. We've lived through quite an election here. But I also think that right is might. And I think we are right and we're on the side of truth and justice. Now, Jonathan, one more comment and then we'll close.
I just want to say thank you to Lisa. Lisa, you are outstanding of getting us together, negotiating time, and I can just imagine it's not an easy position as the president of Restorative Justice International. And we want to say to you, we salute you. Thank you for your initiative. Thank you for just driving us. And I know that each one of us appreciates you and we love you.
Oh, thank you so much. I sure appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And you're right, it's difficult these days doing this work, but we know how important it is, and each one of you are important, and those who couldn't make it today. But we'll continue, we'll press on, we'll try to think differently in this next year. We need to recharge. I know for myself, I kept thinking, I'm not sure I got the energy for this anymore. But then you get up and you realize how much is needed and how much it's right and why this work is so important. So thank you for all that you've done this year. And we'll go into next year with our armor on as we fight these battles and do what's right. Thank you all.
Good health, good health, good health, so that you can continue to
Blessings to
work.
you for the festive season.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas all and Happy
All
New
right.
Year.
Merry Christmas to you all.
And this
Thank
is
you.
Lisa Ray for RJI. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the RJI podcast series with Lisa Ray. Stay in touch and support our work at restorativejusticeinternational.com.